My name is Tom Riley. I'm 51 years old, born in Wichita, Kansas, where the winters are dry and the people are polite until they're not. I've worked in logistics most of my life. Nothing flashy, just the kind of steady work that keeps supply chains from falling apart. But a few years back, I shifted into consulting, helping companies tell their internal stories better. Cleaner systems, better onboarding, brand training. Eventually, that led to speaking gigs, then small roles in campaign strategy. I never asked to be on camera. It wasn't something I chased. But people said I had a warm presence. That I made things sound clear, trustworthy, like someone you'd actually believe. I'd never thought much about how I looked. I mean, sure, I knew I didn't match the sleek, angular style you see in commercials or HR videos. My face is round, full. My neck thick, my smile soft and asymmetrical. I've got small eyes and permanent redness in my cheeks, like my blood doesn't quite know when to settle down. People call it friendly. I've heard that word a lot in my life. Not handsome, not strong, just friendly. It's the kind of face people are okay seeing, just not if they're trying to sell something. Still, I never imagined it would become a problem. The day of the shoot, I showed up early. The office space they'd rented was modern, cold, full of neutral tones and open glass. A camera crew was already setting up lights, moving soft boxes like puzzle pieces. I was supposed to be part of the internal training video, a quick sequence introducing new hires to the company's values. They wanted real employees, real faces. Nothing scripted. That's what they said anyway. I'd helped write the campaign brief. I'd been there from the beginning. The idea was to make things feel human again. Less perfect, more grounded. But somewhere between the planning and the lens, that idea got cleaned up, sanitized. I noticed it when I walked onto the set and saw who else was there. Every person looked like they'd been plucked from a lifestyle catalog. Trim, symmetrical, glowing. Even their casual clothes looked curated. And then there was me, wearing a navy overshirt, off-white turtleneck, and the kind of calm I'd worn my whole life like a shield. The director greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He gestured to the mark taped on the floor and asked if I could just stand off to the side for a moment. I did. I always do. I've been stepping aside since I was a kid. In group photos, in meetings, at buffet tables. It's second nature. Watch them set up the framing. Adjust lighting. Pull in a guy from marketing who hadn't even been scheduled. He looked good on camera. I'll give him that. Strong jaw, confident angles. He delivered his lines with the ease of someone who's used to being watched and approved of. Then a woman from HR stepped in to whisper something to the director. They glanced at me just once, then turned away. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Eventually someone approached and said they were restructuring the sequence a bit. Said they'd probably only need voiceover from me, not on-camera presence. I nodded. Didn't ask why. I already knew. The lens turned, away from me the same way people do in elevators, casually, carefully. So no one has to say what they're really thinking. They didn't say I was too fat. They didn't say my face wasn't marketable. They said the camera wasn't quite picking up the lighting correctly. Said the brand needed consistency. Said it would be cleaner if we simplified the visuals. It's the kind of language you learn to hear between the words. Not cruel. Just exact enough to leave no room to argue. So I stood there, just off frame, watching the campaign I helped build be delivered by people who looked more like the brand than the message. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push back. I just smiled once, out of habit more than anything else, and walked off the set with my hands still in my coat pockets. What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that 48 hours earlier, I had signed another contract. Different. Company. Same industry. But with people who didn't ask me to step out of the frame. They pointed the camera right at me, and they hit record. They never said the words directly. That's the thing about the way people operate when they're uncomfortable with how you look. They speak in edits and omissions and carefully managed silences. A week after the shoot, I got an email from the comms team. It thanked me for my participation. Said the footage had come out great and they were in the final stages of post-production. No mention of cuts, no mention of changes. Just gratitude, vague and professional. I almost believed it. Almost let myself imagine they'd decided to keep me in, that maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I'd overread the glances, the hesitations, the sudden change in tone on set. But when the video launched, I didn't need to look hard. My part was gone. Not shortened. Not edited down. Gone. The frame where I'd stood was replaced by a clean shot of a hallway and a voiceover that sounded eerily close to the one I'd recorded, but tighter, smoother, someone else's. They'd kept the message, my words, the rhythm I'd written, but they'd handed the face of it to someone they thought fit better, someone whose image wouldn't distract from the content. It hit harder than I expected. I wasn't new to being overlooked, and I'd told myself over the years that I didn't care about being seen, that I was content being the quiet voice in the background, the reliable guy who didn't need to be in front. But seeing the final version, with every trace of me surgically removed, wasn't just rejection, it was erasure, like I had never been in the room at all. I replayed the video 3 times, hoping I'd missed something, a glimpse, a reflection in the glass, maybe even a credit at the end. Nothing. Just a polished lineup of smiles, button shirts, and perfectly modulated voices, none of them mine. What burned wasn't just the exclusion, it was the knowing. The knowing that they'd used what I gave them, but not who I was. That they took my words and ran them through a filter, stripped them of the weight that only lived in my voice, in my face, in the years behind my eyes. And when that filter didn't fit the brand, they didn't adjust the brand. They adjusted me out of the picture. For the next few days, I kept quiet. I answered emails, did my job, smiled in meetings. But every time someone mentioned the video, how clean it looked, how tight the messaging came through, I felt something press into my chest, something heavy. I realized I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I didn't want them to come, crawling back or offer some late-stage justification. I just wanted them to admit it, that they'd looked at me and decided I wasn't enough for the screen. There's a different kind of silence that follows that kind of knowing. It's not bitter. It's not loud. It's just still. Like a door closing softly behind you in a room where no one asked you to stay. I thought about calling someone on the team, asking why, asking what changed. But I didn't, because we both already knew. The truth wasn't in the edit notes or the shooting script. It was in the way they avoided eye contact when I said my lines, in the way the producer complimented my voice but never once adjusted the light to fit my face. So I let it be. I let them run their version, and I turned my attention to the other contract sitting in my inbox, the one that hadn't asked me to lose weight, to tilt my head differently, to stand behind someone else while they delivered my lines. The one where they saw me and said, "Yeah, that's the guy." It hadn't launched yet, but it would, and when it did, I wouldn't be a line of text buried in a credit roll. I'd be the face and they'd know exactly what they cut. The funny thing about being excluded is that people forget how visible rejection actually is. They think it happens quietly, behind closed doors, that it goes unnoticed because no one talks about it. But the truth is, when a company edits someone out, it sends a signal, a very public one. You may not hear the conversation, but you feel the absence, and somewhere someone's always watching. I learned that the day after they released the final cut without me, when my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. It wasn't a friend checking in or a coworker offering sympathy. It was a creative director, different company, bigger brand, competitor. She'd seen the draft. Not the public video, those hadn't dropped yet, but the internal agency cut that had been circulating through industry hands. She said she liked the message, but more importantly, she liked my presence. Her words, not look, not energy. Presence. Like somehow I had managed to come through the screen even when the light wasn't flattering, even when the room wasn't made for me. She asked if I had time to talk, said they were building something different, something honest, though I've learned to take that word lightly. Still, I agreed to the call. We talked the next afternoon. No scripts, no mood boards, just conversation. She asked me what the other shoot felt like. I told her the truth, that it felt like being asked to bring your soul to a meeting and leave your skin at the door. That they loved my ideas, my tone, my narrative, but not the face it came from. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize on their behalf, didn't tell me how wrong they were. She just said, I want to build a campaign around real trust. And real trust doesn't come from symmetry. I didn't say yes right away. I've lived long enough to know that not every invitation is sincere. Sometimes they just want your story, your pain packaged neatly to prove they're better than the last place. But this time felt different. She wasn't looking for redemption. She was looking for weight, for the kind of gravity that only comes from someone who's been through the fire and didn't walk out shiny. We scheduled a test shoot. Nothing fancy. Just a camera in a conference room and a prompt. Tell us something. That doesn't fit on a resume. I told them about my first job, how I worked the night shift in a warehouse and got promoted because I noticed a broken safety process that no one else had the time or interest to fix. I told them about sitting in the back row of meetings and writing the talking points other people got praised for delivering. I told them about being a face no one remembered until the numbers improved. They didn't stop me, didn't direct me. They let the story breathe. Afterward, she shook my hand, said she'd be in touch. 3 days later, I got the contract. Full campaign, multi-channel, lead role. It didn't come with a makeover, no stylists, no rebranding. They sent me the draft storyboard and I was in every frame. Not tucked behind product shots, not shadowed under voiceover, just me, talking, looking directly into the lens like the audience was sitting across the table. When I told a few people, the reactions were muted. Some congratulated me, but most didn't know what to say. Maybe they assumed I wouldn't take it, that I was still hoping for the first company to change their mind, to call me back and say they'd made a mistake. But I wasn't waiting. I'd already stepped forward. What no one at the first company understood was that being cut didn't stop me from being seen. It made me easier to find. Because once you're not part of the polished surface, people start to notice what's underneath. The story, the voice, the fact that you never needed to fit the frame in the first place. You just needed someone willing to hold the camera still and let you speak. That's the thing about brands, they watch each other closely. And while one team was busy removing me from their story, another was already writing a new one, with me at the center. The morning the campaign launched, I wasn't prepared. I had seen the draft, the layout, even the final cut. Of course I had. I'd signed off on everything. But nothing prepares you for seeing your own face at scale in public, on platforms where people can scroll right past or stop and stare. I was walking to a coffee shop I'd been going to for years when I saw it. A digital billboard above a commuter tunnel near downtown. The ad rotated every 15 seconds, and there I was, mid-sentence, eyes clear, voice playing through a muted screen, captioned in bold white type. Some brands talk. Others listen. My face right there beneath it. No logo covering half of it. No soft fade transition to someone more on brand. Just me. I stopped walking. The cars kept moving. No one around me seemed to notice. But something shifted in my chest. Not pride exactly. Not shock either. Something more elemental. Recognition. After so many years of being the one behind the scenes, the one whose words were passed through other mouths, I was finally, unmistakably, visible. It was disorienting. I stood there too long. The screen looped again, another ad, then back to mine. For those few seconds, I didn't blink. Later that day, it was everywhere. LinkedIn posts, industry blogs, the homepage of the brand's website. An email campaign went out to their full client base, and my face was at the top of every message. I kept checking the website like I was expecting them to pull it down, like someone had made a mistake. But it stayed, and the comments started rolling in. Not about the lighting, not about production quality, but about the message, the delivery. The way it felt to hear someone who didn't look like everyone else say something that wasn't trying to sell a dream but trying to name a truth. They remembered the story. But more than that, they remembered me. It wasn't because I was the best-looking person on the screen. I wasn't. It wasn't because I had the most dramatic narrative. I didn't. It was because when I looked into the camera, I didn't try to be someone else. I didn't lift my chin to hide the fullness in my neck. I didn't turn my head to the side to slim the frame. I didn't read from a prompter. I just said what was real. And somehow that was enough. I started getting messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old colleagues, clients, a manager from my warehouse days. One person wrote, "I saw you in the ad. I recognized you before I read your name. You always had something different." That line stuck with me, not better, not prettier, just different. And now for the first time, that difference wasn't a liability. It was the reason people stopped, the reason they remembered, the reason the campaign worked. What made it even more surreal was knowing that while all of this was unfolding, the company that cut me had just launched their next round of messaging. A safe campaign, pretty faces, soft colors, perfect pacing. But no one was talking about it, no one was sharing it. It wasn't bad. It was just forgettable. It faded into the noise because it didn't have anything to say beyond the surface. And I knew then, without bitterness, without spite, that they had passed on more than just a face. They passed on presence. There was a quiet kind of victory in that. Not one I needed to celebrate publicly. I didn't post a side-by-side. I didn't name names. But I watched the numbers climb on our launch while theirs stayed still. I watched the comments pour in from strangers who said they felt seen for the first time. People who looked like me, sounded like me, carried the same discomfort with the camera, the same shame for not fitting the frame. And I realized the thing. I'd always been told to tone down, to edit out, to shrink. That was the thing that finally made the difference, not the polish, not the performance. The face they didn't expect to remember became the one they couldn't forget. I don't know exactly when they saw it, but I know they did. People like that don't miss campaigns that size, especially when it comes from a direct competitor. They track launches, monitor tone shifts, analyze engagement metrics down to the decimal. It's their job to notice, to report back, to strategize based on who's winning the room. So I didn't need confirmation. I didn't need a message or a call or a name tagged under a post. I knew the silence was real the moment it stayed silent longer than it should have. At first, I thought maybe someone would reach out. Not with an apology. They were far too polished for that. But with some vague acknowledgement, some friendly check-in disguised as a compliment. Something like, "Saw the new spot, nice work," or "Looks like that campaign's getting some attention." But nothing came, not a word. Just the kind of deliberate quiet that only happens when people realize they made the wrong call and have no idea how to fix it without admitting what they did. I imagined the scene in their office. A muted conference room, someone clicking through. The live page, pausing when my face appeared. Maybe someone else looking up from their laptop with that half-smirk people get when they're caught off guard. Maybe one of the producers shifting in their chair. Maybe the HR rep, the one who'd whispered about visual consistency and on-brand tones, closing the tab a little too quickly. I could see it all, the uncomfortable glances, the stiff breathing, the attempt to change the subject. There's a tension that only silence can deliver. When it's loud, you know where you stand. But when it's quiet, strategically, precisely quiet, you understand what they're not saying, what they're swallowing, what they're pretending they didn't see even as the numbers climb and the article headlines begin to turn. I don't know if they watched the whole thing. I doubt it. But I know they saw enough. Enough to realize the person they edited out was now the lead in the very campaign their client called braver than anything we've done. The irony didn't escape me. Not then, not now. I didn't gloat. I didn't screenshot the coverage or send it to anyone inside their walls. I didn't post vague subtweets or cryptic stories about being overlooked then wanted. I just kept doing the work because I knew the silence in their office was louder than anything I could have said. People around me started noticing the contrast too. Co-workers who had seen both campaigns. Clients who had once passed me over now reaching back out. One even said, They really missed it, didn't they? I just nodded. Because yes, they had. But it wasn't about missing a face. It was about missing the moment, the opportunity, the chance to say, "We see you," and mean it before someone else did first. That's the thing. They thought they were protecting their brand by making it cleaner, safer, more appealing. But brands don't grow by playing it safe. They grow when they take risks on people who make others feel something. And that's what they forgot. They forgot that people don't remember perfection. They remember connection. They remember being surprised by honesty. They remember the human in the frame, not the polish around it. And now, they had a campaign that no one talked about, and a silence they couldn't explain. I've learned something about power in that kind of silence. It's not about revenge. It's not about winning in the traditional sense. It's about occupying space you weren't supposed to, and doing it without flinching. It's about showing up in the very place they tried to keep you out of, and not needing to remind them of it. Because when your presence is undeniable, your absence speaks louder than anything you could have said to defend it. So I let their office stay quiet. I let their glances stay uneasy, and I got back to work, knowing they'd scroll past my face again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. The first time someone recognized me in public from the campaign, I didn't know what to do. It wasn't dramatic, no pointing, no photos, no crowd. Just a woman in line at the grocery store who looked at me a little too long, then smiled and said, "I saw your video. It stayed with me." That was it. Just 6 words, but they landed heavier than most praise I'd heard in a decade of work, behind the scenes. Not because they were loud, because they were quiet, because they didn't need to say anything more. And I think that's what this whole thing had come down to. I wasn't trying to be famous. I wasn't chasing a moment. I wasn't angling for attention or trying to prove some oversized point. I just wanted to be in the room. I wanted to be allowed into the frame without someone checking the corners of it to see if I matched their style guide. And when they said no, when they chose someone else, someone smoother, I accepted it. But I didn't stop. I kept moving. I stepped into the next room, into the next set, into the next story. And eventually, the camera turned back to me. Not because I demanded it, but because I had something to say when it did. And when the record light went red, I didn't perform. I didn't pitch. I just spoke. I told the truth in a voice that wasn't taught to posture, and from a face that had been overlooked enough times to stop caring how it landed. And that campaign, the one I wasn't supposed to be in, the one they never saw coming, it worked. It did more than work. It connected. It traveled. It touched people in places the polished version never reached. Not because I was special, but because I was real. Because when you stop trying to be what they expect and start being exactly who they forgot, you change the shape of the conversation. I didn't gloat when the numbers passed theirs. I didn't throw it in their face when the campaign picked up press, when it was quoted in articles, when it was cited as a model for braver messaging. I didn't call anyone back. I didn't drop a single "told you so." Because what mattered wasn't who saw it. What mattered was who felt it. What mattered was what happened when people watched it and didn't turn away. I remember the moment I saw the full version of the campaign for the first time. It wasn't in a studio or some fancy reveal. I watched it in my car, on my phone, sitting in a parking lot with the air still running. I hit play, and there I was, on screen, mid-sentence, talking like I always do. Not polished, not stiff, just present, just there. And I watched myself say things I'd carried for years, now woven into a narrative that was finally allowed to exist out loud. When it ended, I didn't cheer. I didn't clap. I just sat there watching the black screen and letting the silence come over me like a blanket. It wasn't closure. It was continuation. Because I had filmed the thing, but not the one they wrote. I didn't show up in their version of the story. I didn't deliver their lines. I didn't fit the angle they tried to shape the world around, and in the end, that was the best possible outcome. I didn't need their lines. I didn't need their framing. I didn't need their permission. Made it to the screen, but it wasn't their screen. It was mine. And for once, I didn't shrink to fit it.